All right, David. David, thanks for coming back on and talking with us, talking with me about empowerment evaluation and some of the things we'll talk about here today. And I wanted to ask you, starting off, kind of what for people who are not as familiar with empowerment evaluation and its sort of main goals, could you kind of sum it up, give us the
Mhm.
elevator speech that I'm sure you have
Okay,
perfected? Let's see.
sure, no problem. I'm gonna
Yeah.
do I'm gonna do it in all Japanese. Is that okay? Or you
Yeah,
want
that's
English?
good. That's perfect. Yeah, sure. We'll get an auto some kind of AI translator in there. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, they'll take care of that.
Yeah.
It's really simple. I think we've written I don't know, at least 5 or 6 books on empowerment evaluation, something like that, maybe more. And the basic definition really hasn't changed. The technical one, as it were, is just the use of evaluation concepts, techniques, and findings to foster improvement and self-determination. So in a nutshell, we're really helping people use evaluation to assess their own programs and use the evaluation information, whatever they find from it, to inform their decision making. The whole key in when you think about empowerment evaluation, for those that are not as familiar with it, it's kind of normal evaluation in many respects, except for one tiny thing: you turn it upside down so that the people that you're working with are in charge and you're a coach and you're a facilitator. That's sort of the 30,000
Yeah.
kind of foot of what the approach is about. And
So
quite frankly, the rest of it detail.
got it. Yeah. Important detail, but still detail, right? So
Yeah,
so it's interesting. So you're flipping it upside down. So you could like contrast it with like the typical like research academic approach where the researcher is the expert in charge. And many evaluators, I think, maybe have that, some
yeah,
at least have that approach as well. So this is very much when you're
yeah,
saying flipping it, that's the main thing. And by flipping it, then it changes the whole dynamic. Like things are,
yeah,
it changes maybe
yeah.
everything about it, or a lot about it, about the whole
Every,
evaluation dynamic. Yeah.
yeah, everything gets shifted. I mean, we change who we are. It changes how people perceive us. It changes the whole focus on basically self-determination. In other words, this helps people become more in control of their own lives. Very Bandura kind of stuff, self-efficacy, etc. But it's powerful to watch, and people sort of grow into it, and they are reshaping their lives and looking at the normal, regular resources they have around them from a totally different lens, from a lens that maybe they can work with it themselves instead of relying on someone else to maybe eventually get to it, which of course never happens, that sort of thing. It also shifts our relationship where, for example, if I came in, and I said, I've looked at the video here now, and I'm going to give, on a 10-point scale, 10's high, 1's low. I give you a 3.5, and you go, David, I don't need you for this interview. See you later. You give it to yourself. Then you say, David, how can I help you? It changes the whole relationship about who I am as a coach, as an evaluator. And people complain, initially that, oh, David, you're working us out of a job. Yeah, I'm working us out of a job for the part that everyone else should be doing. Because many years ago, I got at the American Evaluation Association, I asked traditional folks that say, who were skeptical initially about, empowerment stuff. How many of us are actualizing our potential? How many of us are really, doing what we were trained to do completely?
Right.
Hands. No hands went up. None. I said, okay, 80% of us, 80% of our ability to do what we want. No one. I think, oh, we had one person who put his hand up.
Okay.
I said, how about maybe 50%? We're able to do 50% of what we're really trained to do, because we have to really just build management information systems and all the basic stuff we need to then do it. Hands started going up. I said, if people are doing it themselves, what they should be doing anyway to monitor their own performance, etc., you know how much more we can do to actualize our own potential. So it changes what we can do as evaluators, even though it makes it look like we're secondary, because now we're just coaches helping people
Mm-hmm.
rather than being in charge. But it changes the whole relationship as far as what you see happen. In other words, the elephant in the room emerges that people didn't want to talk about before, because they're more in control of that conversation. They're more likely to produce real results instead of just doing what they need to for that contract. It's over and that's done. I've worked with hospitals, for example, where I worked with them, they did a nice job, ran out of funding, I had to go to other places, came back 5, 6, 7 years later, they're still doing it. And then I used that information that they collected, in this case to the Hewlett Foundation, and said, look at this, what these guys have been doing. Don't you think that maybe with some additional support, they could even go a whole nother level? And they did. So it can be used for advocacy as well, if the data merit it. But the point is, it's one of those things that when people start to do it, it's not only contagious, but it's hard to let go of, because it's like the first time they really are in control of their lives when it comes to assessing their own performance. And most places, quite frankly, hate to say this, but most places in workplaces are broken. There's something really wrong with them. They're dysfunctional. And this becomes a window of opportunity to do something finally about it. Nobody wants to walk into their job every day and they know this is not working. And they could, if someone listened to them, it could at least make it smoother, more efficient, a little bit more rewarding. And this becomes an opportunity to do that. So the reason I mention this is I was invited to go back to the Oakland public school system after 20 some years. Okay, I was there long, and you know how it goes. Superintendents come, they go, they want their own, priorities, blah, blah, blah. Not at a high level, but on a low level, they were continuing it. They couldn't maximize it because they didn't have the resources, but it's so contagious and so basically addictive in a sense that they had a certain level that's maintained, even though some people went, some people let, go, whatever, they were able to retain a certain part within their parameters. Anyway, my point is that most of my experience, and I'm sure yours too, is that we go and do an evaluation. They like it, they don't like it, you're gone. It does not continue. It's done. No, they think it's parasitic because normally in evaluation, it's money like taken away from some programmatic activities.
Right. Sure.
And this is actually part and parcel of the planning and management. It's internalized as part of what you do. So when you're planning to build, a program, you're now thinking about how the evaluation is just part of the thinking to do it, to implement the program, rather than something secondary assessing it and just saying whether they did a good job or not. So it's good.
Let me ask you, the it that you're referring to is what, just incorporating like evaluation, evaluative thinking into like daily regular activities, like about into organizational functioning. Is that the it that you mean is sort of you see it incorporated? So is empowerment evaluation very much like an approach that is then has like the effect of enhancing evaluative thinking? Is that kind of like and inculcating it into the organization? Is that kind of one of the main things there that you're describing here when you see it sort of like stay on and persist and over multiple years? Yeah,
it's sort of a process use kind of thing, and that is the theory that the more that people engage in actually doing an evaluation, the more likely to find it credible because it's theirs. And number two, they're more likely to be able to think like an evaluator because they're incorporating the same cognitive skills, et cetera, as well as, a way of not just thinking, but sort of feeling how the world should work. Most of us focus just on the pure cognitive part, but it's much more encompassing because it's affective as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's because people, this already. I mean, it's hard for us to admit, but most folks don't just do something because the data is right or it's analytically correct. It's because it feels right. That's, we don't like to admit that, but that's true. If you can then back it up with data, that's like a powerful thing to move forward with additional credibility for outside folks, et cetera. But because it feels right to them when they know they hear something's actually working or not working. And the more that it's internalized, that's not questioned the way it is in traditional evaluation as secondary, parasitic, because taking money away and time away from the primary thing. Instead of it's thought of as just an integral part of how you actually implement a program, for example, effectively, rather than it being, I'm going to give my best shot, I'm going to keep on going and going and going and no assessment. And then we realize, we failed, it's completely off target because they weren't doing mid-course corrections, just assessments. I mean, the other part of it is when we go through empowerment evaluation, and I think some folks, I guess, are familiar with the 3 steps that I use. Help them come up with a mission, help them then take stock of where they are, and then help them plan for the future based on that. Well, we also have an evaluation dashboard that says, well, for example, smoke-free parks. How many smoke-free parks do you want to have? We do a lot of smoke prevention, tobacco prevention work in Arkansas, for example.
Yeah.
And you want to say 20 smoke-free parks in a year. Well, then you want to have 4 in the first quarter, 4 more, 4 more, 4 more, et cetera. If you don't get 4 in the first quarter, you're not slapped on the wrist in this approach. You're just told, wait, you need help. And when you get someone who knows how to do that better, in this case in Arkansas, which we did, and she came in and she said, well, David, what we do is we get clear plastic bags and we have the kids go through the parks and put all the cigarette butts in them. And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, like it must have shown in my face. It's like, that's nice, but that's not really what I had in mind. Says, David, wait. And I go, okay, I'm listening. She goes, then I have the kids take that clear plastic bag full of cigarette butts to the city council, sometimes with a journalist, sometimes with the photographer, et cetera. And guess what? Then we get either signature stuff, signage, or we get natural policy. And think about it. If I went there, they'd go, oh, thank you, Professor Fetterman. That's really nice. We'll take that under advisement and consideration. They know I'm going to be gone and they're not going to do anything. But they did it. It made sense to them. So they presented in front of the rest of the group. And the rest of the group, oh, I can adapt that and make that work. Bottom line is, if they don't make their goals or their milestones each quarter, not slapped on the wrist. It's just a sign for help. So we get help from someone who's doing it well in another community that's a similar community, and they give advice as to what to do. And we've also gone to the CDC for health assistance as well. And then you can make mid-course corrections all the way through. But you see how that dynamic, when we're talking about this, is so, for me, so much more powerful and more rewarding than, we're talking about our kids and stuff before we started this, and we want to see them grow and develop and go into the right direction and decide for things for themselves. Well, without being paternalistic, that's what you want to see communities do. You want to see them take charge of their lives, become independent decision makers, and this just gives them the tools that they probably should have been given before, but no one's given them to them. Because to me, and I'm sure you believe the same thing. I want everyone to know how to do, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and evaluation.
Uh-huh.
It's just part of what you need to be as a citizen in any kind of country to inform your life in a productive direction. So that's the flavor of this. And what's funny about this is people look at this probably 5 or 10 years from now, they're going to go, this is just common sense. They don't realize that what we've been through, that this is a revolution in evaluation thinking, which is shocking because it's obviously common sense. And when you see it in practice, it's so productive so quickly. Why would you think of any other way? Why would you ignore what people have to say? And why would you keep them separate from decision?
Right.
So,
you see it as a basic skill, fundamental skill for just for that people should have to make, and also for like a healthy, I guess, democracy as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So one of the core things. So that's something you spend time talking to your son about. Obviously, it's something you've
It's funny. You know what I like about this? I tell you, I love it. I don't show it too much, but obviously I'm very proud of him. And I didn't push at all that you should take on my approach. It just became an opportunity for him to focus on this thing for a presentation. So I would help him with some slides, and we talked. And he already knew I hadn't practiced the talk, make sure, he was saying it correctly and stuff. And he had 90% of it already just in the background. Yeah, I haven't formally gone over and over with him, that sort of thing. Now, obviously, he just picks up by being around, type of thing. But it's wonderful to see how much, it's sort of like when they're little kids, you're shocked at how much they're actually listening and how much they actually are. Same sort of thing here. Let me tell you one just quick story. It's kind of just funny though. I also worked, in the School of Medicine. I was director of evaluation over there at Stanford for a while. And there's this one, he's a kidney specialist, and he says, he's a great. I used to have to look at all the lectures, to establish how well they were going, for the curriculum, and blah blah blah. So I'm listening to this one lecture he had. He said, for me, it's very important not to push what I do on my kids. So I try not to tell them they have to be, a specialist in a renal, organs and stuff like that. I did get them lamps that do have, and it shows a picture of kidneys. And I do have, so he goes on and on, he goes up this whole list of everything. I mean, everything you can imagine on the walls has something to do with kidneys, but no, I don't really say anything about it.
You just
I,
bake it in.
yes,
Yeah, that's funny.
so I suspect I'm the same way without knowing it, that
Uh-huh.
probably I carry this around. Oh, my book came in, but it's tough, but what's funny is I really have not formally like tried to indoctrinate or tell him, this is what you should do, or his.
Yeah.
He just started picking it up, and it was useful for this presentation that they want. And boom. So yeah, I don't tell him, but obviously I'm like, wow, thrilled. It's like another Fetterman is doing the same thing.
Yeah,
Like,
that's pretty
wow, that's
cool.
pretty cool. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I wanted to ask you something, kind of drill in a little bit here to specific micro skills. Like what are when you are like facilitating, evaluation meetings, sessions, activities, right? Like what are the micro skills that you use to ensure effective communication, engagement with the clients, the stakeholders,
Yeah.
that's like consistent with empowerment evaluation. So how would you describe those sort of micro skills, like the things that you do in
Yeah.
to push that along to facilitate? Yeah.
Yeah, I break them down and into categories. And for those who want to see a lot more detail, I wrote about this in empowerment evaluation and community psychology because of an alignment of values and principles. And that's in Scott and Wolf's book on community psychology and foundations of practice and stuff. But I break it down into interpersonal skills and communication skills. And it's where you're really being more respectful of individual feelings, being sensitive to cultural differences, that sort of thing. That's sort of one general category. Group facilitation, you have to have facilitation skills. There's no question about it. So that you get a chance, everyone gets a chance to speak, contribute. You have to know how to moderate conflict. You have to know when people are on the one hand saying, oh, this is just a process point, but they say it like 15 times. It's just their way of controlling the situation. And you have to go, oh, let's hear from someone, blah, 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 in addition. So you have to know how to move the conversation along. I mean, when I do mission, taking stock, planning for the future, I don't have people, I have them jot down key phrases for the mission. I don't have them write up a whole thing. They'd be bored to death. I then get just ideas, and then we jump. That prepares them mental scaffolding to get to assess and to evaluate what they're doing, not to have it, they can wordsmith it later. So facilitation skills are absolutely critical, no question. Another third category I have is advising groups concerning data collection analysis, that sort of thing, helping them. I don't presume they know how to do all the stuff perfectly. I know that they can do it if I help them, show them how to collect online survey data, for example. I can advise them on technical things like no compound questions and all that kind of stuff. So there is a certain amount of advising for data collection, analysis, and reporting. And then two other categories, you try to create a safe, there's no such thing, but create at least a concept of a safe, a self-critical and constructive environment. And you do that by modeling, by not being a jerk and saying, oh, that's stupid, or I don't want to hear that, or just cutting things off, or not letting someone, raise their hand or say something and not calling on them if that's the mode you're in. So you're trying to keep the criticism diplomatic and constructive, but honest. And then the last, if I break them up into categories, it's cultivating organizational learning. So I'm helping people learn how to use this data to inform decision-making for organizational change, not just for an individual kind of preference, et cetera. So not to be too analytical, but I kind of break them into those kind of categories. So that helps remind me if I'm missing something when I'm trying to facilitate. I have a piece I've written about it in some of our work in the med school at Stanford, and how, excuse me, being which I call a critical friend in this process, or a coach, you have to be able to take on a variety of obviously opposing, conflicting viewpoints and still hold them and show them that you respect those differences, even if you don't happen to believe in one versus the other. And if you do have something to say, to be honest, and take off your facilitator hat and say, would you mind being a facilitator, bringing your own points in and having a thick skin in case they hate it, in case they don't like what you had to say. And then go back into the facilitation role. The key for me is to try to not dominate the conversation when I want to, because many of us are control freaks, and that's how we get things done. And it's very hard for us who have that compulsion to let it go. You create a safety net, but you are let them kind of make some mistakes or ways that would not be as efficient as you have in mind.
Yeah. Well, can I let me ask you about that right there? Because that's what I was thinking about as you were talking about this. So the notion that you kind of have to let them kind of do some work and maybe go in the wrong direction. And so how do you manage that? If you and you could be right or wrong about that, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
maybe you think it's going in the wrong direction and ends up,
Yeah.
doing just fine or working out fantastic. But you're probably right most of the time, right? After doing this, for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that how do you manage that in the moment, like in the meeting, through the emails, through the whatever the interaction is, Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, it's like, for example, I'm working also right now in India, and we're trying to eliminate tuberculosis using empowerment evaluation. And the folks that are on the ground, I'm doing a lot of this all remotely at this point. They have sometimes a reluctance to move in the direction that, for example, I would like them to move in. For example, we have folks who've had tuberculosis. They are often advocates once they become healthy again for what we're doing, and try to work in the community, try to work with the healthcare services, et cetera, and try to change how that operation works. In other words, have people that in the community be more sensitive to the meds that they need to take, the routine, the scheduling, but also get away from the stigma. Same thing, they're trying to work with the healthcare system and try to have them not have the same level of stigma, not provide better services and quality of service, et cetera. Well, I want the healthcare services people to sit down in the same room as the advocates. Okay, to me, it's obvious and what needs to be done, and no one disagrees with me. But the problem is, on the ground, they're saying no. This has to go much slower than what you'd like to do, David, because we might ruffle some feathers, and it's very political, and it's going to be conflictual. And the thing is, I know that, and I lived that for the last 20 years. I've been doing this at least, and that's what you want. This is not a conflict-free process. It's just that it's contained, so it doesn't get out of control. You have bins of mission taking stock, and you then have to move on. But it's for example, in a township ages ago, and I work in squatter settlements in South Africa also. I was doing my workshop on 3 steps and all that sort of thing, and I'm very linear, and very goal-oriented. So I know my own weaknesses in that. I mean, I know it's good, American society is very useful, et cetera, but it's got its drawbacks, particularly with this kind of work. And I'm going, mission, I'm into this taking stock. And in the middle of that, and I think I'm doing great, this lady says, I don't believe in any of this stuff. And I'm going, what? I thought everything was moving along beautifully, right? And before I even had a chance to respond, this other lady comes up to her shoulder and says, the reason, oh, by the way, I should mention, this is for a teenage pregnancy prevention program in the community. This is the reason that we need this program is because your daughter is pregnant. Everything just blew up. I mean, she started screaming, she started, and this denial, the steps that everyone goes through to deal with this stuff. I saw them in real life, okay? Just watching in real time also. Anyway, so this is how dumb I am. I'm thinking, thinking like Spock, for the greater good, you keep on going. So I asked the 2 of them to go into another room, talk, blah, 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 and I'm moving along. I'm in the next part of taking stock. I'm almost into the plans for the future. I'm so proud of myself. I didn't say anything, but it's inside. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm pretty good. So Nick sauntering back in, and I'm thinking, hey, not bad. Everyone's calm, everything's under control. And I thought of the larger group, not just the individual, which you have to do sometimes, et cetera. And I'm just before break going to move into that part where they say, here's our new strategies or our new goals. And, which is like, wow, they're actually moving forward to helping move, not just do an evaluation, but plan for the future based on the evaluation. And this is like within a day, it's like, we're like cruising, right? And she yells, I still don't believe any of this. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to stop. So I stopped.
Mhm.
I said, okay, how many of us here, if I gave you like a million Cougarant or uh, a yacht, or a boat, how many would go for that versus a teenage pregnancy prevention? Oh, everybody seems to go up for that. Sure, sure. And how many of us are in favor of this teenage prevention program that's what we hear about. That's one of our primary focus, for health and stuff. Half the hands went up. I said, okay, let me rephrase this. How many of us do not want? Keep in mind, a lot is done in a place that prohibits premarital sex. So that's in the background of your mind to understand why this is kind of a sensitive issue.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, how many of us do not want to have a teenage pregnancy prevention program in this community, but think that unfortunately we need to have one? And the lady goes, oh, I get it. I get it. My point in all of this is I am very linear, and as a coach and facilitator, I do like to move things along, and I'm pretty successful getting things accomplished. But sometimes you have to stop and take a detour and listen, because if she had that concern, others had the concern as well. So part of the facilitation, part of the skills you're talking about that you have to have,
Yeah.
listening on a deeper level, not just listening like we're supposed to be, actively engaged. We all know that kind of stuff, or most of us know anyway. But it's listening to what you're not hearing. That's what you have to hear. And you can hear it. If you listen carefully, there'll be people who will say things. And if you're comfortable enough or familiar enough with the group that you're working with, you will know that that is resonating. You can even see it if you look at the body language. You have to train yourself to be aware of what you're hearing when you're not hearing it, in a nutshell.
Right. The medic communication. What did you where did you take it from there?
Then once we got to that point and she accepted the fact that we don't want it, but we happen to need it, then she was comfortable enough with, okay, then I can see where we have to have it. And primarily for, of course, other kids, but recognizing she had her own problem to deal with as well when she went back home. That was the first time she had even heard of that, by the way, unfortunately, during my workshop. But the point is, once she was on board, I had to take a detour. I had to talk about not wanting this, but why we need rather than want. It changed the whole conversation to, okay, now I can see where I could actually help to build this new teenage pregnancy prevention program. I could maybe even contribute something with its writing, pamphlets, or whether it's helping to hire people or whatever, whatever role seemed to fit for her. People were willing to jump in more versus just nod and say it's nice and then take off, of course, afterwards. And it worked, it all happened. And all this is on a shoestring budget, by the way. This is not like, phenomenally a great endowment here for this effort. These are small townships, and but that's the point. You can do a lot of this stuff with the resources that you have. Now, if the data merit it, you can use that to advocate for more money. And what's nice about this process is the more you do this, the more you show people what they can do themselves, and they document it. Then they can go to a foundation, to a government, source of money, whatever, and say, here's what we've been able to do with some funding. And here's where we're terrible. And we need a lot of work. And no one wants to admit that they're not doing well in something. But if you're doing well in everything, what do you need money? What do you need more support for?
Yeah.
But if you can show that you've done well, here's my proof. I have a good track record and I've documented it. Then you can say we've done terribly here. We have real big problems. Trust us to be able to, give us the money to work on that the same way we did this. That becomes an educated citizenry in terms of advocacy, evaluation, and the whole thing. You understand the game a lot better, and it's honest. It's very straightforward. It's very motivating too to have people move forward to make changes in their community when they can then see other communities have done this and they moved a whole different level. Like, see, I've got this book here. This one, check this out. This one I talk about Hewlett Packard's $15 million race towards social justice. It's got pictures of the Native American.
Which book is that? Which book is it?
Oh, sorry. This is Empowerment Evaluation. This is Stanford University Press. Empowerment Evaluation in the Digital Villages.
Okay.
And Hewlett Packard's $15 million race towards social justice. This one had to do with bridging the digital divide in communities of color. The 18 different tribes I was working with built one of the largest wireless systems in the country, unlicensed because it's, it's a Native American, it's tribes and stuff like that, and reservations and stuff. Anyway, the point is, when some of the tribes saw what these folks were able to do, like build towers that have a wireless system, and a lot of them didn't trust, the internet or computers or whatever for a lot of reasons, because it has been, a lot of traditional policies and practices and technology have been used, unfortunately, against Native folks. But won't go into all the detail of what the Bureau of Indian Affairs used to do. But they say separate kids from their families and not have them learn the language and not even allowed to speak it. So it's a pretty horrendous situation. They have a lot of baggage, a lot of tribes I worked with government sources and the use of technology sometimes. So it's a massive turnaround to then accept a lot of this stuff, but use it for their own purposes. But my point is, when folks have that kind of control over their own lives and resources and make these decisions, they can do phenomenal things in the process. And it helps when they do it, because then it's advocacy for other groups. For example, First Nation groups that didn't want to work with Anglo folks saw this on the net, what they were able to do as a model, picked up a lot of it themselves. So it's kind of as you see success, I have my folks, whether it's in Ethiopia, we did the same thing, highlight their stuff on YouTube or wherever, because it helps other people launch and take that risk, the leap of faith, that maybe this is something that helped them move forward, be more self-determined. So it's, to me, the reason I'm mentioning all this is that these successes that you see, and I'm not saying they're all 100% successful, okay? We have high, low, medium levels of empowerment. And my point is, even low levels is better than zero levels. And that when I have people try to disseminate what they're doing, it's amazing what the ripple effects are as a model, because people go, well, I'm like that. I could do that. And that's what you want them to see, that we are all capable of so much more. But sometimes we have to see someone like us to be able to have that kind of trust in ourselves to move forward. Anyway, that's one of the things I try to highlight in this process, is that it's important to disseminate, because a lot of the stuff, I believe in, the data has to merit it, but a lot of it can be used for good old-fashioned advocacy. We always have an evaluation anyway, we're just not honest about it. This way, it's just let's put it up front. If you can pull this thing off and show what you're able to do with the resources, you can then go anywhere and ask for more resources to do what you're not doing well at all. And you can admit what you're not doing, which is, none of us want to do that. We're all trained to say we're all successful all the time. Not the case.
Yeah. So as you're going through this process, these different projects throughout the years, and what do you do? What are your own strategies that you use to stay self-aware and to reflect on your own practices, your own assumptions regarding projects, regarding your work? How do you, that's one of the sort of the things we speak about in evaluation, right? Reflective practice or reflexive practice, right? The importance of that, and of course in other fields too. We didn't just come up with that idea, but how do you do that? What are the things that you do, the specific things that you do to promote that?
Part of it, I think I have many levels, most of which I don't control. In other words, sometimes if I'm sharing this with my family, they'll be happy to critique me. So that's one. They have no problem at all telling me, well, I'm not sure that's a good idea, or this, why'd you do that, or so they let me know that. The nature of the process, by having them do the mission, having the community do taking stock of where they are, and having them plan for the future, puts me in check all the time. Because one thing, I barely get to say much about what I think. It's theirs, and when I do, I have to have a thick skin because they may not agree with me. That's cool. Okay, but I feel compelled to actually share my view as well because I have some insights that might be useful. I think of myself as not superior or inferior either, sort of a co-equal. So I've got some things to say, but I keep it to a minimum because it's their show, etc. Donors let me know if they're not happy. So
Yeah.
where I'm going. I mean, I remember one time, just to give you an example of feedback that keeps your head from swelling, that's for sure. Is aside from the folks you're working with in the community telling you, what they need and don't need, the donors definitely can be pretty tough. On the community level, let me put it this way, I'm working in a township and I know a little bit about horticulture, not a lot, because my mom grew up with extension. She was a professor at UConn. And so I know a little bit about 4-H and all this other stuff. Anyway, gardening, but not an expert, but enough. And I'm busy talking about hypertension and see the other issues in the township. And I hear someone talking about building, gardens and stuff like that for sustainability, food sustainability and stuff. So I go, oh, I can help you with that. And they go, no, that's okay, David, we got that. From the old David, an evaluation kind of person, you go, I'm insulted. I come thousands of miles over here and I've got some insights that could be really good for the new kind of person you become is fantastic. They don't need me on the same level. They've got that down pat. So that's one kind of feedback you get that helps you remind you of what you're trying to do and then put a check on your own control behaviors and all that kind of stuff. The donor one is also very effective because they'll often do things like, we had this really big project, reasonably big. It was a $5 million project in East Palo Alto. And the foundation was not happy with us. It's trying to help people become more entrepreneurial with digital equipment and stuff like that. Anyway, so they thought we were going too slow. So they basically took all the money back, told mostly Black folks, slapped them in the face and said, no, you're going too slow. I'm going to take this back. And my team at Stanford, they said, obviously we don't need you if we're taking the money back from them. And one of the things they did some beautiful housing. I got to admit, it's gorgeous housing. But in 2 years, it fell apart completely. I mean, total garbage. No one owned it. No one had a sense of ownership. No one took care of it. They didn't know how to take care of it. It was completely wrong. So the company, Hewlett Packard, came by and said they wanted to talk to me. They had seen what we'd done for the foundation money that we had been working with, and what they it's a small community. They knew what happened, and I didn't really want to talk to them because I was kind of disgusted with the whole thing because that was a pretty negative message I was getting. Talking about messaging you get to keep yourself, focused and not in control. Well, that was a heck of a message. You don't think of that. You only think of from the community. Well, the donor was very clear. You guys, fire you guys. You don't know what you're doing. You're taking too long, etc. The company, not foundation, the corporation came by and said, David, it took a long time because I didn't trust them. I didn't want to talk to them. But a friend of mine, she's the head of the community service stuff at Stanford, Nadine, she told me, David, they really want to talk to you. It's really serious. I said, sure, okay, for you, I'll do it. And I asked them, what are you in this for before I even talk to you? And they said, to make money. I said, well, at least you're being honest with me. It's not the answer I want to hear. And they said, no, we're not going to push any of our computers on them or software they don't need. It's just that we're going to give them equipment, and the branding is important to us so that if this all works, they'll remember us and maybe buy our stuff in the future. I said, that's okay. That's not a devil's bargain. That's actually okay. Anyway, bottom line, after talking with them and discussing it and being honest about all the stuff, they multiplied it and that became this project, the $15 million times 3. They loved what we were doing so much. And they knew what we do takes longer, to be honest with you, because it takes longer to build that capacity with folks and for them to make decisions and make mistakes, etc. But on a timeline that's not outrageous. But it's just more sustainable and more powerful. Anyway, my point in all of this is that on a small level, it could be a family level, it could be peers in the journals who happen to knock you down, with no problem, or with donors or the folks you're working with. You're constantly getting feedback about whether you're taking enough initiative, whether you're taking too much, that sort of thing. So it's, on the one hand, we focus on the interpersonal, which is what you're highlighting right now. And how do you keep that going? And which it's a good question, and it is what we have to deal with all the time. But what I'm saying is that there's multiple layers that you're constantly having to play with and listen to keep you focused. I mean, on a micro level, some people say, David, we only have a limited budget. We can't include this tribe, or we can't include that. And my point is, yes, that if you follow the principles of empowerment evaluation, and one of them is inclusion, then you find a way, even though it's not fiscally responsible. You may email them, you may use the free Zoom, you may, whatever you need to do, you remember the principles shaping it, because the real answer to your question is that the reason we wrote empowerment evaluation principles and practices, we weren't making the principles explicit enough. When you make the principles explicit, it reminds you, oh man, I'm messing up again. I got to come back to the concept and find a way to make this happen. Even though as a administrator running projects, stuff like that, that fiscally that's stupid. You can't do that. You can't.
So let me ask you, you say making the principles explicit of empowerment evaluation, that was sort of I imagine empowerment evaluations evolved over the years, right?
Yeah.
It's just like anything. Is that one of the things that sort of, was that a part of the evolution, or one of the things that sort of evolved, like having a kind of a principles a foundation that you could kind of refer? Yeah.
I think one of the mistakes, we made a million mistakes, I mean, there's no question. Luckily we were at the heart of it, we were right on target, and the core remained and stuff like that. But I used to have people just on a simple level, when I have them do the ratings 1 through 10, I'd have the easel, away from everybody so that nobody could see each person putting in their ratings and stuff like that. Well, that's stupid. That's traditional evaluation, because you want confidentiality so that you can see what people put. That's stupid. Why would you do that? You want to know what John thought, what I thought, what you thought, and why you thought it. So eventually we turned it around the right way, because you want to know who said that. You want to ask, why did you give it 3? Because then if you gave communication a 3, I want to know why. And then you tell me, because we don't have any agendas. We have overlapping meetings. Well, then I know what to do to plan for the future to improve it. I need to have agendas. I need to have fewer overlapping meetings. Otherwise, I can come up with this beautiful kiosk online of a calendar, keep us all on track. It has nothing to do with the problem. So we made tons of mistakes. And one of them that is germane to this particular question you're asking is that we didn't make our principles explicit. So people were doing what they thought was empowerment evaluation, and they didn't always reflect what we thought when we looked at it, what we would call empowerment evaluation. There's no capacity building, well, that's critical, right? There wasn't enough inclusion, well, that's critical. So we wrote down, we got them in a bunch of books. This is all from this book over here, Empowerment Evaluation. This one's probably the best one to get for those who want to know more about the details of empowerment evaluation. But just as an example, some of the principles of improvement: community ownership, inclusion, democratic participation, social justice, respecting community knowledge, valuing evidence-based strategies. A lot of people, they throw out our scholarship because they think, oh, we burnt the community, we wrote an article and we didn't go back to them. Well, you can still adapt that. You don't throw that out. And then capacity building, if you're not doing some capacity building, help them learn how to evaluate their own programs, then you're probably not doing empowerment evaluation. Organizational learning, and bottom line, accountability. Did you do it? So we wrote that book, Principles and Practice, because we realized we were remiss. But in the process, it helped us refine our thinking. So all of the arguments, then we've been through a lot of arguments that we've had in the journals that helped us refine our conceptual clarity and our methodological specificity. We've gotten much better over time about sort of saying what we really mean and what we really are doing in practice, rather than having just larger, concepts and phrases thrown around. So we've got much more focused, no question about it. So I appreciate all the critiques, and for those who are not familiar with the process, we were attacked vigorously by colleagues at various stages, and luckily, we responded to each item, we listened, and then we find critique and make it better. So,
I appreciate that. So kind of in wrapping up, I just wanted to ask you one last question. Are there Thinking about the future of empowerment evaluation, are there any other areas or enhancements that you're thinking about that you'd like to see happen with empowerment evaluation changes, shifts, anything? Like, speak to the future of empowerment evaluation, please.
There are a lot of things. Right now, we're doing a lot more work and experimentation with combining empowerment evaluation with, say, other stakeholder involvement approaches like collaborative evaluation. Kellogg Foundation asked me to come in to do empowerment evaluation. The board approved it, blah, blah, blah. And I saw where it was beautiful, obviously in a lot of places, but I also saw some places where it wasn't needed and they only needed collaborative forms of evaluation. They didn't need to have that same investment. They felt secure enough in their own skin as to be able to handle different things. They just want us to collaborate, not do a lot of the work themselves. That's cool. So we're learning that part of it. Something brand new. I was invited to be a presenter for the Depression Summit to use empowerment evaluation, not for clinical depression and extreme versions, but the normal depression that people have in daily life, but to use it as a way to deal with it. And I thought, well, I've never even thought about this. And we talked about how you use the process of helping people focus on what their mission or purpose is, because they've lost it along the way, help them assess where they are, and even use plan for the future for their future plans, and then have an evaluation dashboard to monitor their behavior over time. And this is a whole new thing. They just invited me. I gave a talk.
You said depression or depression? Depression.
Yeah, psychological depression. It's a gigantic issue that is kind of ignored. It's not sufficiently dealt with in the world, in society, and they're coming up with alternate ways of dealing with depression. If it's not like super clinical depression, so and chemical imbalance and stuff like that, obviously that's beyond our purview. But normal kinds of depression is not really dealt with very well in particularly in the United States, but also in the world. So this conference came up with these speakers that have alternate ways of sort of working with it, to be able to maybe address it in a way that's going to be more powerful, that's going to actually do something that's practical, that people can actually do themselves. And it's interesting that they did that, because many, many years ago, when I was explaining and introducing empowerment evaluation, I think I scared a lot of the co-presenters. I said, I want everyone to close your eyes in the room. And they went, oh my gosh. And I said, I want you to think about the worst, most disempowering moment or part of your life ever. It could be divorce, could be death, could be, whatever. Take a minute and let them just sort of sit there. And of course, my panelists are thinking, oh my gosh, David's going to the deep end, right? And I said, okay, now I want you to think, what did you do to get out of that emotional pit?
Mm-hmm.
Evaluation. You assessed where you were, and then you had to come up with ideas and plans for moving forward to take those steps out of there. That's the same sort of thing that I just presented on. And I hadn't thought about it, quite frankly, for many years, and they invited me to do that. So that's one area, that moving with different kinds of stakeholder approaches and trying to think about how to fuse those. This whole idea of whole new areas that enter. And then the last thing, this book just came out, as you know, I think about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, Empowerment Evaluation and Social Justice. This one has the examples of what we're doing in India, trying to eliminate tuberculosis, but also working with Feeding America and trying to work with food banks. My point in mentioning that is that we're also trying to help people appreciate and also learn how to respond to this key question, which I always get in workshops and I get in classes. Can you use empowerment evaluation if you already have an existing evaluation plan or an existing evaluation, existing work? Well, this has a chapter dealing with, in one case, an pre-existing evaluation plan. And here's how you can then take empowerment evaluation and superimpose it, not one or the other, but work together. And if you have an existing work plan, not just an evaluation plan, how that can also work together beautifully as well with solid case examples. Nice. So when you ask sort of what's our next thing, where we're going, that's sort of where we're going. Is it's sort of what can you do if there's already an existing.
I can integrate it. Yeah, right.
And integrate it, because that's the classic question. Otherwise, it's like, oh my gosh, you already have the money, you've already gotten it per project. You have to do what they're saying, right? But so
Mhm.
how do you use this common thing? We are showing people what we did in major projects to do that. So
Right.
to answer your question, those are some of the things that we're doing to move towards the future. And we're doing them now with real case examples, not just something hypothetical. And it works.
Yeah, it could be methodologically agnostic. You can do with any number of approaches, right? Qual,
Yeah,
quant, mix, whatever,
yeah,
and then you can mix and match with other. Yeah, you know, I've used different models together, different frameworks together, and I find that it can be really helpful, like bringing in the best or
yeah,
the parts of the different models, the different frameworks that are good, that are especially suited for that particular project, the way I see it, at least. So
exactly.
that's great. So that's really interesting. Well, great. I love it. So I had 12 questions here. I think we got through like 4 or something, like 5 or something. So we're gonna have to do this again. I hope that's gonna be okay with you. Let's see. I'll reach out
Yes.
to you at some point. Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate it, David. Good
Oh,
hearing
yeah.
from you and hearing some of the some of what you covered here. That really gets at some of the details I think people would like to hear about. I certainly was very curious about it. So thank
I'm
you.
happy. It's always a pleasure talking with you. It's nice to chat because how many people do you get to chat with, about stuff who really understand all this stuff and in depth,
Yeah.
and then we can share this conversation with other folks who also, they have the same questions we've had. We're just at this stage of our thinking in it. That's all.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So we'll definitely be sharing this with others, with students, with evaluators, with whoever wants to listen to it. So thank you.
Real pleasure. You take care, huh?